Hey everybody, welcome to the Mainstream Indie Music channel. I always appreciate you guys checking in every week, and I want to give a special shout out to everybody that checked out last week's episode. That was a special one to me. As I mentioned in that one last week, Squeeze has always been a band. I grew up listening to them. You know, in my household growing up, it was the Beatles number one, it was Talking Heads number two, and it was probably Squeeze number three. And then U2 probably being number four, but they're not, of course, an indie band. Well, I guess the Beatles aren't either. But anyway, I digress. It meant a lot to me doing research for that video and finally talking about them. I've been wanting to for quite some time, and it was cool to finally give voice to that, and it was very well received. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do. It's an interesting video about their history. But this week, we talk about a frontman. We talk about the frontman. Now, when you think about frontman in even just the indie genre, in the rock and roll genre of like the 2000s, who do you think of? Oh, you might think of Julian Casablancas. That's a big one, especially right now. You might think of Ben Gibbard, another big, huge figure in the modern day movement. You might think of people like Kelly Okereke, Win Butler, and, the list kind of goes on and on. But Ezra Koenig, have you ever thought of him? Many people, of course, might just think of Vampire Weekend. You might even think of Rostam, which we've talked about on this channel before. But, Ezra, he was the big brains, I believe, behind Vampire Weekend. He's the one that thought of like their garage rock sound, but then kind of changing it to lighter melodies, kind of deeper, thoughtful lyrics, even worldwide African guitar rhythms, drums, classical instruments. They started to grow, from the beginning. Now, maybe you only know Vampire Weekend from their first album days, from A-Punk, right? Maybe you went a little deeper, modern Vampires of the City. Maybe you went there. Or maybe you stuck with them the entire time. Well, we're going to talk about Ezra, and we're going to talk about how he got everything going. Because Vampire Weekend, we're not going to go into a huge history. We even have a video on Vampire Weekend here on this channel. But you have to think of the late 2000s. Arctic Monkeys are huge. The Strokes are huge. Interpol. Yes. New York City. We have a whole video on New York City and indie music. You got to check it out. Then all of a sudden, from Columbia University, there are these guys dressed up in polo shirts, all colorful, and they sound very different than the indie scene. They were almost kind of dismissed as like, oh, that's that kind of rich, snobby Ivy League band. They kind of got everything going for them. And instead of copying the garage rock sound, which was becoming huge, especially with like bands like Kings of Leon and the Black Keys around the corner, but rather than do that, they went with like Congolese guitar music, Afro pop, Baroque even. You kind of think of like Paul Simon, maybe even The Clash a little bit. And songs that they released like Oxford Comma, A-Punk, Cape Cod, Kwassa Kwassa. It was playful, right? It was lighthearted. It was just kind of music meant to just sit down and relax and enjoy it. Now, Ezra, his songwriting style is very different. Is it deep and overly emotional? A little bit, yeah, but I rather see it as a large play on words and playful. There's a lot of symbolism in their songs. There's kind of like subtle humor, philosophy in their music as well. And it's so funny because in one line you'll hear like something kind of normal, like maybe like a broken heart or whatever. Then the next line, all of a sudden, he's referencing like something in like colonial history, and it's just like, what in the world is this? And again, some people thought, you know what? I don't want this in my music. This is a little bit too much. I just want them to write about what everybody writes about. I want the song structures to remain the same. But Vampire Weekend and Ezra just kind of kept going. They trusted that listeners were going to be enjoying it as well. Now, like I said before, Vampire Weekend is a band, especially with Rostam. You combine all of them together, there's no doubt that it's the four of them that made it work, right? But Ezra is the one. He was just kind of like the brains of the group, And like I said, their music started to change over time. And I would say the biggest leap was 2013's album, Modern Vampires of the City, which I noticed before. I think to this day, and I think many people, including many Vampire Weekend fans, would agree with me with saying that was their masterpiece. That was their best album. In fact, that was probably everything that they were working towards. And they were rewarded for it, right? They won a Grammy Award for Best Alternative Album. So it came in. Now, of course, in 2016, Rostam left the band. It was a huge, massive blow because pretty much they were partners in crime. He came up with the production and the instruments. Ezra came up with the lyrics and kind of like the song structure. And now he's gone. And Vampire Weekend then are kind of at a crossroads, because around that time, fans are kind of expecting an album to come out. Okay, it's been long enough. Now your one half of the band is gone. Their creative genius is gone. What did Ezra do? Well, they didn't rush anything. He actually decided to go out and co-write songs with Beyonce, and he started his very famous Time Crisis radio show. He almost just said, hey guys, let's go out and just do our own thing now. It might be good for us to do it. And they waited, and in 2019, Father of the Bride came out. And I think a lot of, especially longtime fans, appreciated the wait. In 2024, they released Only God Was Above Us. And they were also rewarded for that with music critics and their fans. It's no doubt, to kind of wrap up our video, Ezra is one of the, I think, underrated indie artist geniuses of our generation. Yeah, he's not like the first name, like I mentioned to open up the video, that gets brought up in conversation, but a highly underrated one, and one that simply just loves to talk about art. What do you guys think of him? Let me know in the comments.